All right, guys, so today we will be looking at constructing a questionnaire and some basic guidelines on how to do that. So first of all, what is a questionnaire within the research context? A questionnaire is a set of structured and focused questions. So what do I mean by structured? Structured means that the order in which these questions are presented to the respondent has been carefully thought out and selected by the researcher. This means that the questions that come first are there for a reason, and the questions that follow, and each order in which the questions are presented, have been carefully thought out and selected by the researcher. The next one is focused. The questions must be focused to the research objectives and the research question or questions. Remember that the research instrument is what will help you answer the research questions of the study. So of course, all the variables and concepts covered in the objectives and research questions must be addressed within the research instrument. Next, advantages of questionnaires. Questionnaires are self-administered, meaning that the respondent can answer it on their own. This is particularly helpful because of the anonymity that comes with that. Because people, when they answer questions anonymously, they tend to be more honest. And because they tend to be more honest, we say that questionnaires are objective. They are one of the most objective means by which you can gather data. Another advantage is that questionnaires can cover a large geographical area and therefore can be answered by more persons than other methods like interviews and focus groups. Internet surveys in particular can cover a large geographical area and a large number of people. The disadvantage of this one, though, is that online surveys have a lower response rate, meaning that we need to send out more surveys than we might have calculated, or we calculate specifically for low response rates. And I'm going to talk about that when we do sampling. The next thing is that because these internet surveys, these online surveys cover large geographical areas and lots of people can answer them, they are efficient and therefore more economic. Because of course you don't have to travel to the location and find each individual participant to answer the questionnaire. So some basic guidelines for creating the questionnaire. Ensure that the questionnaire does not make unreasonable demands of the respondent. Things like asking someone to fill out a 40-page questionnaire that takes 3 hours. You want to stay within a reasonable time frame, such as 10 to 30 minutes for a questionnaire. So how do you know that your questionnaire will only take a specific amount of time? On the one hand, you can fill it out yourself and see how long it takes. But of course, you created the question, so you might go through it a little quicker. You can then ask a colleague to fill it out for you and see how long it takes. You don't want to go to your population and ask them to answer the questionnaire before it is ready and before it is final to decide how long it will take. So for that reason, we need to be careful and we ask colleagues to check the time for how long it will take. Make sure that your questionnaire doesn't have a hidden agenda. So let's say that you're studying racist behaviors, and you are asking the question, do you prefer the color black, brown, or white? That type of question is sneaky and not related to your topic at all. So you can't actually draw conclusions from that type of question. So if you're going to ask about racist behaviors, ensure that you ask directly about racist behaviors. Another guideline is to ask questions that the respondent can provide the information for. So this goes both for age and knowledge. So maybe you are going to a primary school and you're going to ask standard 2 Miss Alicia about her teaching methods. So you want to know about her teaching methods. You won't go next door to the teacher, to the standard 2 teacher next door, Miss Paris, to ask about Miss Alicia's teaching methods. So you want to ask questions directly to the right persons. Secondly, you want to accommodate for age. So if you're doing a questionnaire for children, the language within the questionnaire must match that specific age group. Other guidelines include providing clear instructions, make sure that it is clear whether the person should tick, circle, shade, etc. Include sections, particularly if your questionnaire is asking about multiple variables. So let's say that we are asking questions about procrastination and sleep. And so you might have 3 sections for this type of questionnaire. You might have a demographic section that asks things like gender, ethnicity, employment status. Those are all demographic type questions. Then you would ask about procrastination, which is one of our variables, and you would include all the questions related to procrastination. Then you would move on to your questions related to sleep. And so you would have 3 sections, and you would include those sections within the questionnaire that you create. Because people are more likely to engage with something that is well organized and appealing to the eye, you want to make sure that organization is included in your questionnaire creation process. That's why we have the sections, the instructions, the numbering of questions, and the numbering of pages. You should also include a cover letter or consent form. For the purposes of this course specifically, Research Methods, RSCH 2014, we are using a cover letter / consent form format, but that does not mean that you will always have this format in all research. Questions must be objective without assumptions or judgments. So you can't make assumptions about people or judgments about people, persons, groups, if you are creating a questionnaire. Remember that you must be objective. So you wouldn't ask questions like, don't you think it's wrong for men to hit women? That question is very loaded with judgment and assumptions and bias. If you are doing a questionnaire on attitudes men have towards women, behaviors men have towards women, gender issues, you must be neutral no matter what your position is. So a question about hitting women would be more objective. It would include a Leicard type scale with attitudes or ideas, and we'll get to how we do that. And therefore would be something like select, agree, disagree, strongly agree, etc. So that's the Leicard type scale. And then we would ask the question in a very objective statement type format, such as, it is okay for men to hit women under any circumstances. That might be a question. And so you're asking specifically about this attitude, and you would supplement it with other questions. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because we haven't gotten to the Leicard type scale questions. However, make sure that there is no bias in the questions that you create. Then we start with easy, simple, non-threatening questions and then warm up the respondent. So for example, going back to our example on racial attitudes, we start with questions about persons' ideas about race and ethnicity. And depending on the type of specific questions that we're asking or specific project that we have, we might tailor our questions to those specific objectives. So we would start with specifically non-threatening questions, such as, have you ever experienced racist behavior towards yourself? And you might give a list of all sorts of racist behaviors. Have you ever experienced any of these behaviors before moving on to ask them about what they have done? to other people. So you would start with easier questions first and more difficult questions later. So here we have the guidelines for creating our cover letter. Right, so writing a cover letter. Ensure to include a letterhead, a date, an address to the participant, a statement of who you are, the purpose of the questionnaire, as well as how long the questionnaire will take to answer. Remember that it's very important that we always offer withdrawal from the research project at any time for any reason to the participant. In addition to that, we must ensure confidentiality as well as providing information for making queries. In some instances, persons might have further questions about the research we're doing, and we need to be open and available. Make sure to thank your participant always and let them know how to reach you, as well as for the purposes of students, include that the research is endorsed by your teacher, your lecturer, your supervisor, whoever is in charge of the course. Right, so going back to creating the questions, make sure that your questions are easy to categorize. So the question about what is your annual income is much easier to score if we give them choices than if we leave it open-ended. The reason for this is because we have to number our questions and then number our responses. So let me show you how we might do this. This question might not seem to you like a statistical question that is going to be thrown into a statistical package and numbers will sort of pop out because we are using words. Categorical questions don't seem like statistical questions, but they are. So if this were a question about ethnicity and we had the options mestizo, Maya, Creole, etc., that would still be a statistical question because we're using a questionnaire, even though it is a categorical type of question. So how do we do this? First of all, you would collect your 200 questionnaires and you would number each questionnaire. So every questionnaire would have a number. Let's say that this question comes from person number 300, sorry, you had 200 questions, 156. So this is questionnaire 156. So each questionnaire would be numbered. Then for the responses, each response would be associated with a number. So A might be 1, B might be 2, and C might be 3. So every individual would be answering A, B, or C. And let's say that number 156, respondent 156, provided their response as B. Now, if you had an open-ended question, you would have lots of numbers. Those numbers would have to be categorized into this type of format, A, B, and C, or 1, 2, 3, because the 1, 2, and 3 are what are going into the statistical package. Remember that you have 200 questionnaires, so you'd have to categorize each response into one of these for each respondent. That's 200 respondents. And then you'd have to go and see whether they gave you a 1, a 2, or a 3. And then you'd have to plug in those numbers into the statistical package. Therefore, when doing a questionnaire, make sure as much as possible that your questions are closed like this, so they give the person options rather than open-ended. We want to reserve open-ended questions for things like ideas, thoughts, recommendations, or anything where the individual is going to write a few sentences. With a question like this, where they might provide you with a number or one response, it is best to provide them with options. This will make your work easier. And that is the reason why we provide that. Also remember that these questions are statistical questions. So the 1, the 2, and the 3 all are representative of one of these responses, whether the question is categorical, ratio, or otherwise. So while these are numbers, so they're providing you their income, and it's a number, that what they make is a number, this type of question is an interval type of question. And therefore, when you plug it in to the statistical package, you will have the option to plug in as an interval type question, which is an option that we have usually with statistical packages. So all of this is relevant once you're doing data analysis, which we will get to eventually. For now, I just want you to know that it is best to use closed-ended questions like this instead of open-ended questions for things where you can provide them with options. The reason being that you will always have to deal with a large number of responses, and these categories or numbers are going to go into the statistical package. All right, so designing questions. Make sure that your questions are interesting and engaging. You don't want the questionnaire to be boring, of course. Neat and tidy, because of course we are very fickle creatures as humans, and we tend to respond better to things that are appealing to the eye. So your questionnaire needs to be pretty in essence. Next, remember to ask questions that are straightforward and clear, and of course, word your questions carefully. So for example, we wouldn't ask someone, do you beat your children? Because they might be quick to say no. Remember that it is against the law. In addition to that, this kind of question only lets you know whether they do or don't, but it doesn't tell you how. So we might want to reword the question to ask, do you use physical methods to discipline your child, and provide them with options? Of course, remember, we always start with the easier ones first. So we might say hand spanking is one of the options. We might move on to lashing, but with the slippers, then lashing with a belt, or spanking, that might be another word that we might want to use. And then we're going to move on to things that are much more violent, or all of these things are violent really, but extreme, that is the word I want to use. Things that are more extreme, like extension cords and machetes and brooms and wire. So all of these are more extreme, so they would be on the lower end of the options. Again, with everything, we have to have flow. Remember that your questions are structured. So think carefully about the way that you design your questions. Next, we'll talk about scales. So these are interval type questions. So we already talked about the multiple choice type of questions where people have options. Next, we're going to talk about scales. So a rating scale is made up of items that are within a continuum. In this example, very satisfactory to very unsatisfactory. So these types of questions are Leicard type questions, and they offer options at an equal distance from each other. In this case, 1 point. It is best suited to measure attitudes or thoughts, feelings of people. What we do is we sum the score. So in this one that we have here, we have a statement and we have the scale here on the side ranging from 1 to 4. And you can see it's 1 point difference between each number. Sorry, not 1 point, 1 number difference. And what we will do at the end is that we will add up the results to give us a number that will exist within a scale. So for example, we might ask questions about procrastination, and we might ask how often somebody does it. So never to always, and then they will answer the questions and they'll provide a score or a sum at the end, and that sum can then be plugged into a reference. So any score from 0 to 60 means not a procrastinator, 60 to 61 to 120 would be mild procrastination. Over 121 and above would be severe procrastination, for example. So this is the essence of the Leicard scale. So how do we construct a Leicard scale? We construct a Leicard scale by collecting statements about the attitudes from people with a wide range of attitudes towards the subject. So we might get a focus group or just a bunch of people with the varying ideas. You might be able to do it within your groups if you are doing a group project, and come up with ideas about attitudes people might have towards the particular concept that you're studying. Then you assess the statements as either clearly positive or clearly negative, meaning that this statement we can very clearly say yes to or very clearly say no to. Anything that is confusing or you can't quite say yes or you can't quite say no to and sort of a maybe, then you discard those statements. Make sure that the people evaluating, so the group that you're in, can all agree on the questions that need to be discarded and the questions that need to be within the questionnaire. Once you have put all those questions together, you have your questions for your scale. Now remember, these are not questions specifically, but they are statements. Note how here we have statements. I can always manage to solve different problems if I try hard enough. Note that it is not a question, it is a statement. Likert scales have statements, not questions specifically. We have other types of scales, such as semantic differential scales, that measure opposing adjectives about an attitude. So they might measure good to bad, weak to strong, or slow to fast within a 7-point continuum, where the respondent marks an X on that continuum. So if I were to show you what that looks like, we might have on one end good, and we would have 7 points. And the individual must put an X within one of these lines from good to bad. And our statement would go up here. Remember, we're still dealing with statements, not questions within a scale. Lastly, we will look at ordinal questions. In this type of question, we offer rank options from first to last, or something you like the most to you like the least. And what this does, it helps the person to rank items, and it helps us to know what people like the most. So for example, you might ask people to rank the following sports from 1 to 4, with 1 being your favorite and 4 being your least favorite. This might be relevant to us if we wanted to know what people's favorite sport is. You might also do it with ice cream if you were doing a marketing project. Which flavor did you prefer the most? Rank from 1 to 5 if you had 5 options. So an ordinal type question helps you to gain an idea of what is most important or most favorite to people, to what is least important or least favorite, least acceptable, least whatever. So we are going from one extreme to another, using an ordinal type question where individuals are going to rank their options. So those are the essence. Essentially, what is going on with my language at the end of this video. But in essence, those are the various types of questions that you can construct, and these are the basic guidelines for constructing your research instrument.